Chapter 5 Hell in Manhattan, Inside Ground Zero. The earth shook, the towers fell, and the dead cried out beneath the stone. The collapse, a city consumed. At exactly 9:59 a.m. on September 11, 2001, the South Tower collapsed. But it didn't just fall, it detonated downward. The structure crumbled in seconds, and with it came a hellish roar that drowned out every other sound in lower Manhattan. It was not a crash. It was a thunderclap from beneath the earth, like the core of the city had been ripped open. From the base of the tower, a cloud of debris exploded outward at over 400 miles per hour. Concrete turned to powder. Steel became splinters. Flames licked upward as oxygen was sucked into the implosion. In a matter of seconds, what had been a towering icon of American capitalism was reduced to a monstrous tidal wave of smoke, ash, and glass, devouring everything in its path. Sirens cut off mid-transmission. Radios went dead. Firefighters who had been charging up stairwells vanished from existence. Office workers on the street were swallowed in white. People fell. People ran. People screamed. And then, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed. It wasn't just another collapse. It was a second death. A death of hope. A death of disbelief. The skyline was no longer missing something. It was mutilated. A hole had been punched into the heart of New York. What stood in place of the towers wasn't a building site. It was a smoking crater, a void. Ground Zero, the birth of Ground Zero, where once stood two shimmering towers of steel and glass, now stood an apocalyptic mound. The earth was blackened. Fires burned without flame. The air tasted of electricity and rot. And the sound, there was no sound, just the hiss of falling ash, like snow that would never melt. Felt like the end of the world. For those who survived the collapse, the world had become a gray hellscape. Ash coated every surface, choking lungs and blinding eyes. The sky, once blue and brilliant, had turned to slate. You couldn't tell noon from dusk. It was all shadow, all smoke, all silence. People wandered through the wreckage like ghosts, coated in asbestos-laced dust, faces white and cracked, eyes wide with disbelief. Some clutched briefcases. Some held torn shirts to their mouths. Others walked barefoot, their shoes melted or lost in the stampede. One survivor later said, "It looked like Pompeii. Everything was gray, frozen. The dead weren't screaming anymore." Voices from the ash. Firefighter Mike Kehoe was one of the few who made it out alive from the base of the North Tower. He described it like this: "It was like the building came alive and tried to bury us. We dove under a fire truck and waited to die. I thought, this is it. But when I opened my eyes, I was still here. Everything else wasn't. Not everyone was as lucky. Thousands were still inside, trapped beneath layers of steel and concrete. Some died instantly, others waited, pinned in darkness, limbs crushed, air running out. Some called loved ones. Some left voicemails. Some texted prayers. For many, the last light they saw was from the glow of their phone screens. Their only connection to the world above. Their last confession. The FDNY's darkest hour. At 8:47 a.m., just 1 minute after the first impact, the firefighters of FDNY Ladder Company 10 and Engine 10 were already rolling out. Their station was across the street. They were the first inside. By 9:30 a.m., over 400 firefighters were inside the towers. They came from all 5 boroughs. Some drove in from off-duty shifts. Some came in on foot. They brought hoses, axes, and air tanks. They climbed floor after floor, past smoke, past screaming civilians, past fireballs in the elevator shafts. They didn't ask questions. They didn't turn around. When the towers collapsed, 343 firefighters died. Among them was Captain Patrick Brown of Ladder 3. His last radio transmission said, "This is 3 truck, and we are still heading up." There was Father Michael Judge, chaplain of the FDNY. He died giving last rites inside the North Tower. He was later designated Victim 0001. There was Chief Peter Ganchi, the highest-ranking uniformed firefighter in New York. He refused to abandon his post, even after the South Tower fell. He was still giving orders when the North Tower collapsed on top of him. They all knew the risk, and they went anyway. Police on the edge of chaos. The NYPD and the Port Authority Police Department became the thin line between order and total collapse. Police officers herded civilians away from the towers. They kept streets open for ambulances. They coordinated with helicopters circling the towers, reporting in real time as the buildings burned from within. One NYPD pilot warned, "The top of the tower is glowing red. It's going to go." It did. His warning came only moments before the North Tower fell. The Port Authority Police Department lost 37 officers that day, the single greatest loss of life in a day for any police agency in U.S. history. Many were last seen on stairwells, helping strangers to safety. Others were digging through debris. Officer Dominic Pizzulo used a steel rod to free his partner, Will Jimeno, who was trapped under rubble. Moments later, Pizzulo was crushed when the second tower fell. He saved a life, at the cost of his own. Ordinary people, extraordinary acts. On that day, civilians became heroes. Wells Crowther, a 24-year-old equities trader, used a red bandana to cover his face. He led more than a dozen people to safety, running up and down the stairs of the South Tower. He never made it out. His body was found with firefighters, his last moments spent helping. Rick Rescorla, head of security at Morgan Stanley, ignored official orders to stay put. A Vietnam veteran, he calmly evacuated over 2,700 employees, singing Cornish folk songs through a bullhorn to keep spirits high. He was last seen going back up the stairs. Janelle Guzman McMillan, a clerk at the Port Authority, was the last person pulled alive from the rubble. She spent 27 hours under concrete, her legs crushed. She prayed. She passed out. She dreamed of her daughter. When rescuers finally found her, she whispered, "I'm here," digging through death. The rescue operation began before the smoke cleared. Firefighters, soldiers, volunteers, doctors, and even dogs clawed through the ruins with their bare hands. Some used crowbars. Others used buckets. They called it a recovery operation. But in truth, it was a search for miracles. Fires still burned beneath the rubble. The steel glowed red for weeks. The air was poisoned thick with lead, asbestos, and pulverized human remains. Breathing it was a risk. Working in it was a sacrifice. Every shift was a gamble. Every movement a prayer. They listened for tapping. They searched for pockets of air. They prayed every sound wasn't another collapse. Nurses from New Jersey ran triage tents. Priests gave last rites in alleyways. Medics sorted remains in church basements. It was a battlefield hospital made from whatever was left. One rescuer said, "We weren't just digging for survivors. We were digging through people's lives. Their desks, their family pictures, their shoes, their bones." The pile, the mountain of rubble was too unstable for machines. So they formed human chains. Bucket brigades. One pail at a time. One life at a time. They didn't call it Ground Zero. They called it the pile. Beneath the pile were remnants of lives erased. Collapsed stairwells, melted floors, steel twisted like ribbon, and fragments of nearly 3,000 human beings. The stench was unforgettable. Jet fuel, burned flesh, hot metal, and dust. It clung to the skin. It lived in the nose. It became part of them. And still they kept digging. The wall of the missing. All across the city, especially near Union Square and 14th Street, the walls filled with faces. Flyers, handwritten notes, photos under plastic. "Have you seen my brother?" Last seen on the 94th floor. She was wearing a white dress, newly married. Each poster was a scream into the void, a refusal to let go, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had made it out. The wall became a living altar. People left flowers, candles, toys, letters. Strangers gathered. Volunteers handed out water. Some simply stood and cried. New York became a city-sized vigil, and the world watched, command in collapse. In the first 24 hours, chaos reigned. Communication was a nightmare. Radios inside the towers failed. NYPD and FDNY couldn't speak to each other. The city's emergency command center, ironically located in World Trade Center 7, collapsed at 5:20 p.m. Mayor Rudy Giuliani set up a temporary HQ inside a firehouse. Rescue maps were drawn by hand. Victim lists were scribbled on notepads. Nothing worked. Everything improvised. But they adapted. They moved. They saved who they could. New York didn't crumble. It reorganized inside the fire, inside the smoke, the flood of response. Within 48 hours, America moved. Blood banks ran out of bags. Food trucks rolled into the city. Volunteers arrived in caravans. Some brought tools. Some brought prayers. Ironworkers, doctors, therapists, nuns, veterans, dog handlers. All came without invitation. All asked the same thing. What can I do? Flags covered windows. Churches rang bells. Fire stations became memorials. People lined up for hours just to hug a firefighter. Others stood on overpasses, waving signs that said, "We love you, keep going." But beneath the love, something else was growing. Rage. The dust hadn't even settled, and already people were asking, who did this? The sacred dead. In the weeks that followed, the effort turned from rescue to recovery. More than 22,000 human remains were found. Most were fragments, teeth, bones, scorched cloth. Entire families were identified by a single bone, and some were never found at all. Over 1,100 victims left no trace. Forensic teams worked day and night. They matched DNA. They studied dental records. They pieced together lives from ash. It wasn't about closure. It was about honor. Every fragment, every particle was treated with reverence. Because everyone was someone's parent, someone's child, someone's love. The final bell. On December 11, 2001, 3 months after the towers fell, the FDNY held a memorial. A bell rang 343 times, once for each firefighter. Bagpipes played Amazing Grace. Helmets sat atop empty boots. Wives clutched framed photos. Children held folded flags. The city wept again, not in fear, but in honor. Reflection. Beneath the ashes, honor. Ground Zero was not just a crime scene. It wasn't just a mass grave. It was a cathedral, a sacred space carved in pain, but lit by sacrifice. Men ran into fire for strangers. Women dug with broken fingers. Priests gave last rites in smoke. Children offered water to soldiers. Strangers carried the wounded on their backs. On that day, no one asked about race, religion, or politics. No one cared about class or creed. Only one thing mattered: who needs help? Amid the worst act of evil on American soil, something holy emerged. The kind of unity that only comes in hell. Because even in the darkest pit, the brightest light is a human soul willing to save another. That was Ground Zero, and it was sacred.